Welcome to the DX Today podcast, your weekly deep dive into the AI ecosystem. I'm Rick Spair, and joining me as always is Laura.
Hey, Rick, it is so good to be back with you on a Sunday, because today we have a story that I think genuinely reframes the entire China versus West narrative in artificial intelligence.
That is a strong opening claim, Laura, so let's get right into it. What exactly happened this week, and why should anyone outside of venture capital actually care about it?
On May 7th of 2026, Moonshot AI, the Beijing lab behind the Kimi family of open weight models, closed a roughly $2 billion funding round at a valuation north of $20 billion.
$20 billion for an open source AI lab in China is a lot of money in absolute terms, but I think the trajectory is the real headline here, not the absolute number.
You are absolutely reading my notes, Rick. At the end of 2025, the same company was valued at $4.3 billion, and now it sits comfortably at $20 billion.
So that is roughly a 5 times jump in about 6 months, which is a pace that even the wildest American AI rounds have a hard time keeping up with these days.
And that is not even the full picture, because if you add up all of their fundraising over the last 6 months, Moonshot has actually pulled in $3.9 billion total.
$3.9 billion in 6 months is the kind of capital that genuinely changes what a frontier model lab can attempt to build over the next 12 to 18 months.
Exactly, and this round is being led by Meituan's venture arm Longzi Investments, with Tsinghua Capital, China Mobile, and CPE Yuanfeng all writing very large checks alongside them.
That investor list is interesting because it is essentially Chinese consumer internet, Chinese state-adjacent capital, and Chinese telecom all coming together behind a single open-weight artificial intelligence lab.
It really is a Team China configuration, and I think it signals that Beijing's tech ecosystem has decided that Moonshot is one of the national champions worth feeding very aggressively.
For listeners who do not follow Chinese AI all that closely, can you give us a quick founding story so we know who is actually steering this particular rocket ship right now?
Moonshot AI was founded in 2023 by a researcher named Yang Zhilin, who previously worked at Meta AI and Google Brain on long context language modeling and architecture research.
That academic and industrial pedigree matters here, because long context work is exactly the area where Moonshot has consistently pushed the state of the art over the last 2 years.
And it shows up in their flagship product because Kimi K2.6 supports a 256,000 token context window, which is enormous by any reasonable benchmark.
Let's talk about Kimi K2.6 itself, because the funding round only really matters if the underlying model is actually good enough to justify the bets being made today.
It is a mixture of experts architecture with 1 trillion total parameters, 32 billion active per token, and 384 experts, where 8 are selected plus 1 is shared.
That is a very modern, sparse architecture. And the active parameter count tells you a lot about how cheap inference can actually be in production when the routing logic works correctly.
And here's the kicker that I think gets buried in most coverage of this round. Their April annualized revenue from paid products had already topped $200 million cleanly.
$200 million in annualized revenue is no longer a science project. That is an actual business with paying users and meaningful revenue across both subscriptions and developer API usage.
And on the distribution side, Kimi K2.6 is currently the second most used large language model on OpenRouter, which is essentially the LLM version of a global app store.
For an open weight Chinese model to be the second most used model on a globally accessed routing platform feels like a genuine inflection point in this entire competitive story.
It really is, and the benchmarks back up the demand. They are claiming 58.6% on SWE Bench Pro, 80.2% on SWE Bench Verified, and 54% on HLE Full with tools.
For non-technical listeners, SWE Bench Pro is essentially a hard test where models have to fix real bugs in real open source software repositories under realistic engineering conditions.
And if their numbers hold up under independent evaluation, they are arguably ahead of GPT 5.4 and Claude Opus 4.6 on that particular benchmark, which is honestly wild.
I want to caveat that strongly because lab self-reported benchmarks are notoriously fragile, And we have all watched models fall back to earth once outside teams reproduce the runs themselves.
Totally fair, but even if the numbers come down a few points after independent verification, this would still be a frontier capability open weight model from a non-American research lab.
Let's talk pricing for a moment, because that is where I think the strategic story actually hides. What is Moonshot charging on Open Router for Kimi K2.6 right now?
75 cents per million input tokens and $3.50 per million output tokens, which is a fraction of what the closed frontier labs charge for comparable quality output.
That is the part that should make every closed source lab nervous, because if open weight quality is converging while pricing diverges, the unit economics of agents start to look very different.
This is exactly what one analyst called the $20 billion paradox. The idea that Moonshot is weaponizing the commoditization of intelligence itself as their core go-to-market strategy.
Walk me through what that actually means in practice for a developer or a CIO trying to decide between a closed frontier model and an open weight Chinese alternative on a real project.
The open weight piece means you can self-host the weights, fine-tune them on your private data, and audit them in ways you simply cannot do with a fully closed black box model.
And the modified MIT license they are using is genuinely permissive, which is a deliberate choice given how restrictive some of the other so-called open weight licenses really are in practice.
That license choice matters because enterprises and governments outside China can actually deploy these weights without constant lawyer drama. And that is what is driving the open router usage numbers we are seeing.
Let's pull back and talk about the broader pattern here, because Moonshot is not the only Chinese lab quietly stacking up a very serious open weight portfolio across multiple capability tiers.
Right, you have DeepSeek, you have Alibaba's Quen series, you have Zifra-style hardware bets, and now Moonshot raising at a $20 billion valuation on a pure open weight thesis.
It almost feels like a coordinated industrial strategy where China has decided that owning the open weight ecosystem is more valuable than chasing closed frontier supremacy that they cannot easily win.
I think that is exactly right, and Moonshot has gone even further by also releasing tooling like their improved Muon optimizer, which reduces the hardware needed to train hidden layers efficiently.
That is a fascinating data point, because giving away both your models and your training optimizers is essentially saying we want the entire global community to standardize on our underlying technology stack.
And if everyone trains on Muon and serves Kimi, the gravitational center of open weight AI quietly shifts toward Beijing without any single dramatic announcement that anyone can really point to as the moment.
Let's talk about risks for a moment, because no story about Chinese AI lab raising $20 billion in 2026 is complete without a serious geopolitical reality check baked in.
The first risk is obvious. United States export controls on advanced chips mean that scaling much further runs straight into a hardware ceiling that domestic Chinese fabrication plants cannot fully relieve quite yet.
And the second risk is downstream, because every American or European enterprise considering Kimi has to think about regulators, data residency, and supply chain optics in a way that closed labs simply do not face.
That is true, although the open weight nature actually diffuses some of those concerns. If you self-host the weights inside your own cloud, the data never leaves your environment in any practical sense.
That is a clever architectural answer to the political problem, but it does not eliminate the broader concern about model provenance, training data, and embedded behaviors that buyers cannot fully audit themselves.
All true, and yet despite those concerns, the open router usage numbers tell us that a lot of developers worldwide have already decided that the price and capability trade-off is absolutely worth it.
Let's zoom out one more level. What does this round actually mean for Moonshot's strategy over the next 12 to 18 months as they deploy this fresh $2 billion war chest?
3 big buckets, in my opinion. More compute for training larger Kimi models, deeper investment in agent infrastructure, and aggressive product expansion beyond the chat assistant into vertical workflows for real businesses.
That last bucket interests me the most, because vertical workflows for coding, customer support, and finance are where the real revenue lives in 2026 and almost certainly beyond as well.
And Moonshot has already shipped Kimi Code Review as a vertical product, which suggests they understand that horizontal chat alone is not a defensible long-term business model in this market.
That is a smart read on the market because the closed labs have shown that the path to durable revenue runs through embedded enterprise workflows rather than consumer subscriptions on their own.
And with $2 billion of fresh capital and a clear open weight thesis, Moonshot has both the runway and the strategic clarity to actually execute on that broader product vision.
So the punchline for our listeners on this Sunday morning is that the open weight versus closed frontier debate just got a lot more interesting and a lot more global at the same time.
Pay attention to the open router leaderboard, watch the next Kimi release cadence, and watch which Western enterprises start quietly deploying open weight Chinese models in production over the next financial quarter.
That is a great place to leave it, Laura. Thank you for walking us through what is genuinely one of the more consequential funding stories of the entire year so far for AI.
Always a pleasure to do these Sunday episodes with you, Rick, and I cannot wait to see how the open weight competitive dynamic continues to evolve over the next few months ahead.
That's all for today's episode of the DX Today podcast. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.